Well, I've got this all dry fit back together, and you'll see that the spring tension on these arms now tends to hold this front section up rigidly in place, whereas previously it would just flop down. So that looks quite useful to me. I think that's probably going to be quite good. So I will just, now what I did to achieve that. Right, let's see if I can find something to show you. So basically, for practical purposes, we can say the spring looked something like that. And it just didn't have enough tension this way. But what I did was I stressed it out so that instead of being as closed as that, now it's more open, and so it needs more, it provides more tension. In its rest position, it is more open. So basically that's what I did. Basically I uncoiled the springs. By how much? Probably about, I was going to say 60 degrees possibly in the rest position, 45 degrees anyway. I did look at replacing them with some other springs, but the only likely springs I found in my selection of spare parts were exactly the same wire gauge. In other words, there'd be nothing in it to replace them with a different piece of wire that was exactly the same and wasn't exactly shaped perfectly. So it made much more sense in this case to just reshape the original springs, basically stress them back the other way to change their rest position. But that looks to me like that's going to be a goer. So I will now just take that apart, lubricate things, and put it back in the body shell, which I've now got cleaned up and ready to accept it. And we'll see how we get on. Well, first I'll have this apart again so I can lubricate that helical mechanism, which at the moment is just dry. And we'll bring that all the way around to there. I can get that out. I'll just unscrew that completely as a unit, those two helicals together, and I'll lubricate the outside, the outer thread on the outer helical. This is where the outer helical fixes in the mount. That's just a standard thread, nothing tricky about that. It's not multi-start or anything, it only starts in one position. And of course should just screw down smoothly. And the inner, well, I've got that out, that wrong, so let's get this inner helical back a bit. So that's my rest, that's my stop position, that's my infinity position. And this should start there. And I've already checked that with my feeler gauge, I know that's correct. I'm just going to put some helical grease on the inner helical now. It doesn't need to be jammed full of it, you just want some in about half a dozen places around that perimeter. That will probably do. Get that Ooh. Where am I? That's it. So that's moving nice and smoothly. The stop at this end is to the frame. This thing here stops the action at this end, the close focus end, and at the other end, at the infinity position, it stops against this post here. So that's looking good. Let's get the focus scale back on there. Yeah, that's nice and smooth. That's good. I'm just making sure that this point is not rubbing on that scale. It is at this point. Difficult to get this shaped so it's not pulling at some point in its travel, just because this isn't very round. Yeah, that feels good. That should be fine. So the door, I've got that pretty clean. Let's give that a brush out. I've got a bit of dust in the corners there. There's still a lot of dirt under there, which I don't seem to be able to get to with a cotton bud. I'm going to try a bit of moistened tissue, see if I can run that down inside there and just lift that filth out of that joint. Yeah, that looks a bit better. Okay, I'll get ready to start reassembling this front assembly, I suppose. I've already had it dry fitted once, so this shouldn't be too tricky. I'll take some synthetic grease, apply some to the slots down the bottom here, and that should fit into the door. These pins on the door, like that. Now to get the other pieces done, I'll lubricate these joints first, so they've got nothing in them at the moment. Yeah, I've got that spring in the wrong position. That's better. Alright, so that should be good. I suppose it would have been nice to have a measurement of the torque on that spring or the tension, but we haven't got that. This is flying by the seats. It seems to be your pants stuff with this. It feels good. And getting these things back in the body could be entertaining. Well, here they are, lubricated and ready to go back into the camera body. And the only tricky thing here is this spring, which is designed to fling the door open or assist the door in coming open. See if I can get these struts back in. Yeah, that's sort of it. I've got to get a screw in there to hold it. Oh yeah, the spring wants to fling these out of the body. Okay. As before, the tricky part is getting a screwdriver in at a suitable angle. Oops, that was the spring at the base there, just trying to burrow a hole in the palm of my hand. Try that again. I think I've got a screw started. If that's the case, I'll get one on the other side. This is tricky because everything's black here and it's hard trying to see down inside the body and identifying the holes. No, that first screw fell out, so I haven't got that in place. I'll get these screws in and come back. Right, I was able to get one screw in each side. Now keeping the two best screws to do the screw holes at the bottom, because they're the hardest to get to, and the ones that aren't so marvellous that can go to the bottom, can go to the top positions where I've got much better access. Yeah, the screw heads are not very well formed. The slots are a bit shallow and ill-defined. Now they look to be the same size as screws that I commonly use on the Retinas, so I can always replace them if I have to. I just can't get that to start. Okay, we're away. That's much more rigid now. Okay, so I'll get these other screws in position now that I'm onto a winner. I'm sorry you can see none of this, I'm not seeing much of it myself. Yeah, those screws are just a nuisance. That was one from the bottom, that was one that was well misshapen. Okay, well that's 4 of the 6 in place. I've saved the better ones for down the bottom, which would probably be just as well because they're the hardest ones to get to. What I need is a nice screwdriver like this, except about 75 mils longer. Okay, I'll have to fight with this alone. Well, I got those screws back in. I've also got the bellows and all back in place. So that only really requires, now that I put the shutter back in place, now that I've identified the lens shim, which I hadn't previously recognised as being in a shim. I thought that was just part of the mount. Let me just wipe that clean. And this is just a fibre washer. In fact, it's multiple pieces by the looks of it. Yeah, just a hard card for all practical purposes. Here I'm just making sure I've got the oil and grease and rubbish off the back of it, because we don't want to be putting oil and grease on the back of the shutter if we can possibly help it. Right, the thin one I'll put on there, then the thicker one there, and should be able to fit this back in place. It has no locating pin, which is a common feature with early Retinas too, which means that it's only located by friction. So I'm making sure I've got any trace of grease right off the front of that focus helical there. And we should be good to go if I pop it in there like that. Now, how was the shutter arranged on this? Was it arranged that way? Would make sense, wouldn't it? I'll put my retaining ring in place. It's not exactly enthusiastic to fit down inside the focus mount. Oh, it's alright when it's in a bit deeper. I know it runs onto the back of the shutter easily enough. Let's try a spanner on that, see if that'll make it easier to do it. Well, I think that's the end of this video really. I'm quite pleased with the state of this. The shutter cocks, the shutter fires. Now firing the shutter, shaking the camera about, the front standard sits exactly where it's been left. There's a certain amount of play in the front standard, that's because of the mechanism, that's the way it is. But it's not flapping about, it won't change its position while you're taking a photo. If you hold your finger back on this, you could certainly affect your focus, but why would you? You're holding the body in this hand and your shutter release is down here. And hitting the shutter release doesn't shift that front standard at all. So you could say that it's a not a very enthusiastic spring holding that up. I would certainly like to see a much stronger spring in there, but having a looking at the space that you have in order to fit such a spring, I don't think that could be achieved. So I think this is probably as good as it's ever going to be, and very likely it was never better than that when it was new. So this Vollenda, which is really an obvious ancestor to the Kodak Retinas, is ready to go home. I think this one's going back to Devon. Thanks for watching. I think this one's on its way back to Cornwall in the UK. It's a long time since I was last in Cornwall.